Hi, thank you for watching this video. Before I get to the point of it, I'd like to give you a little bit more background on myself because I think that's going to help you. A lot of you know that I am a local, that I grew up right here in central North Carolina. I actually grew up right on the line between Moore and Lee County, and I consider both of them home. I'm going to go ahead and tell you that I'm not even going to try to fix my accent while I'm talking because there's no way to talk about this particular topic and keep it without being in the local vernacular. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I was employed as a child. My parents didn't farm, but everybody in the area did. And it was expected growing up here that if you were able-bodied and not already employed, you would work in tobacco and help the farmers to get their crop in. And that's fine. It was a wonderful way to be able to earn spending money. And so I started at about the age of 8 years old. Now, when you're getting up at about 5 o'clock in the morning to go work outside and you're 8 years old, you start most of those work days off crying, and I did. Because what seemed like a great idea the day before to be able to earn money, it doesn't feel like such a great idea when it's still dark and cold outside. Well, I want to tell you really quickly too what's involved in getting ready to go to work in tobacco at that time in the morning. I mean, if you're here in the middle of North Carolina, you already know that at 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, it can be really, really cold, but as the sun goes up, so does the temperature. But you had to dress that morning for how you were going to feel the rest of the day. So, of course, we had a tank top and shorts, but then you had to wear something like a sweatshirt on top of that. But the one thing that I think not everybody knows about tobacco is this. When it's wet with dew and you're working with it and you're covered with wet tobacco, you can end up with what they call nicotine poisoning. And especially in the beginning of the season, that's more of a problem than it is later on when you've gotten a little more accustomed to it. But the way to avoid that, the wet tobacco getting all over your body is you wear plastic. And honestly, the best plastic outfit that you can wear that comes the easiest are great big 30-gallon trash bags. So on top of everything else, I'd have to wear a trash bag, armholes cut into the sides, my arms put out, and then maybe I'd cinch the waist so it didn't look quite as much like the Hindenburg. But as if that doesn't look silly enough, well, you've got to wear gloves as well because tobacco leaves have tar in them, and it's the kind of stuff that just sticks with you the rest of the year pretty much if it gets all over you. So the plastic gloves that we wore were like the ones you wear when you wash dishes. So just keep that image in your mind. When we would get to work in the morning, I need to let you know kind of what all the workers were that were there. When we'd first get there, the primers would already be working. Now, the primers are the ones that are out in the field. And let me remind you of how valuable that crop is. You've probably heard of it referred to as the golden leaf or fields of gold. That's what we call them, because here in this area, that's how the farmers made their living. And as long as that tobacco was good and well taken care of and the weather was right and everything worked out fine, that was good money. It was going to take care of the farmer and his family the rest of the year. Well, the primers would be out there first thing in the morning to do their job. Difficult job. Usually not something that I would be asked to do. Several times I had to, but I didn't have the strength to be able to do it well. A primer needed to be able to bend over all day long. We're talking bending forward, if you can imagine what that does to your lower back. They are walking the entire time, and they are the ones who are having to take a stalk of tobacco, put it under their arm, do it in a pretty fluid motion, be able to carry a pretty good load under their arm, do it at a good pace because you don't want to get ahead of everybody else, you don't want to be behind everybody else. There's a trailer going alongside you that you're loading that tobacco into, and quite often you weren't alone in the field, and it was not uncommon for a primer to put his hand down to grab a stalk of tobacco and be right there on top of a snake. So the primers had a really tough job. Well, once they would get a trailer of tobacco ready, and it would come up to the barn. A farmer had to precisely back that trailer up under the roof of the, I say roof, whatever you would consider it, the little part that came out of the barn. He'd have to precisely back it in there to leave enough room for the 4 women. It usually was 4 women working on the looper. I'll tell you a little more about a looper in just a second. But he also had to not hit the looper itself, because that's quite an expensive piece of equipment. So get that done, and we're all ready to go. And just like the primers, we've got to know what we're doing, and we've got to work at a really good pace, and no slacking anywhere. We would take a handful that we buy, after many seasons of working tobacco. You knew when you grabbed it how much to grab. You grab it from the trailer behind you, flip it onto the looper with the stalk side facing you, slam it up against the wall that was there in front of you, and it's on a conveyor belt. So I've got, in my few minutes, I've got time to slam one handful, grab, slam another handful. And then a child, usually, because they're about the right size and this is not the highest paying job, would grab a tobacco stick, put it on the tobacco that I have just placed down the looper that's going down the conveyor belt. She'd put the stick on, then another 2 ladies would do the exact same thing that myself and my partner had done and put another layer of tobacco right on top of that stick. Then this whole thing, we're talking one after another, would go under a giant sewing machine, and that's the best way I can describe it. And the sewing machine would stitch those leaves of tobacco right through the stalk, right around the stick, so that the tobacco was held on to the stick. If you've never seen it, I'll have to show you a picture. But anyway, it would go through the sewing machine. On the other side, inside the barn, because this was all sitting right in the door of the barn, there would be someone who would cut the string loose if it didn't cut itself loose, which most of the time that's the part that wore out. Somebody would cut the string loose. Then he would take this great big stick of heavy tobacco, hand it up into those really tall, this is how old I am. I was working in barns that were not bulk barns, so that's a whole nother story to do with age. But anyway, he would take the stick of tobacco, hoist it up where people that were tall were inside the barn. That would take the stick of tobacco, and they're balancing themselves up on all these beams, and they're starting way at the top of the barn and hanging these sticks of tobacco one after another, so they all have plenty of room to breathe, so that as they're heated, they can cure and be ready to be sent off to auction to be sold. By the way, I told you that there were tall people up there, so I don't know a whole lot about what was going on in the top of that barn. That was not a job I was ever asked to do. Now, we did all that I've just said because, number one, I knew all the farmers. Everybody there working with a farmer, they were either related to him, or they were a neighbor to him, or they had grown up with these families. It was important to all of us that the farmer get his crop into this barn, because that would make or break him. I mean, his family was going to eat or not eat based on our performance, really. We were not going to let him down. The reward for us would be a couple of things. Number one, we were going to get paid. It wasn't great money, but it was more money than most 8, 9, 10-year-olds were going to make. And even at 16, I wasn't hurting doing it. But also at lunchtime, just depending on the farmer and what kind of time they had. A lot of times, all we were going to get was a drink and a pack of nabs. Or if you don't know what nabs are, I'll be glad to introduce you to that. But we would do all these things for the rewards that were there, that were all necessary. Now, I've just described to you what happens on a good day on the farm. Everything runs smoothly. But remember that I told you I'd get up in the mornings and I'd cry because I knew I had to go to work, and then I'd get there and things would get better. But there were mornings occasionally, and we're talking right as the season was beginning to end, when we would get to work, get to the barn, and find out there were no primers. And for different reasons. When we were waiting for them to show up, they just didn't. It may be that, they're towards the end of the season, they've earned all the money that they wanted to earn for their school clothes, so they didn't come back for that reason. Or maybe their backs were hurting. I'm sure the backs were hurting. They had had nicotine poison maybe 1 too many times. They had blisters upon blisters, you name it. There were a multiple number of reasons that they didn't come in. But there we would be, wearing a plastic hefty bag and bright yellow gloves. We got up when the rest of the world was still sleeping, and there we were, and there the farmer was, and there was no way in the world we were going to get that crop into that barn. I mean, you could go out there and try to prime and then come in and try to put it in the barn, but the whole time that tobacco is continuing to bake out there in the fields. And us doing it that method is just not very efficient. It's just not going to work. It's not going to work well. And it's gonna put the farmer behind. It's going to take us longer to earn the money that we're trying to earn. It's a bad situation. And I could really quickly, myself and the others at the barn could get pretty discouraged pretty quickly just because of the fact that, you know, what could have been a good day for all of us helping to get a crop into the barn suddenly turns into just a lot of frustration. Well, most of the time I worked for two brothers, and their last name was Butner, and I thought the world of them. I had been friends with their families, and they had been friends with my great-grandparents. We had just had many generations of knowing each other. I thought a lot of them. Well, one of the brothers on days like this would stay with us. He was really handy with a hammer and nail, and he would stay around the barn and continue to make repairs and do whatever he could to not waste the entire morning. While the other brother would get the one woman who would always show up to prime. She knew the value of not letting a job go by and her not be there. She was an older lady. He'd get her and they'd go into town. Now she knew the house of every guy who knew how to prime. And he would pull her up to each house and she'd go and knock on that door and she'd say, the Butners got crop in the field needs to get in. They got tobacco that needs to be primed. You know how to do it. We're losing time. Get in the truck. Get in the truck. And they'd go to each house of all these primers and she'd say, I know you've got blisters. I know you want to sleep late, but we've got to help these people get this job done. And it'd be a couple hours, but eventually they'd show up. They'd have an entire truck bed full of help, and we'd get to go in and get the job done. Now she could have run around all over town. She and Wade Butner could have, trying to find just anybody, but they would have brought back a lot of people that we had to train, and we'd already lost time. They went out and precisely looked for people who knew what they were doing and said, you know, I know you're tired. I know you've worked hard. I know that you've been the one who's been there every single day trying to get this done. And I know you'd like to rest. But we need you. We need you. This is extremely important, and this is the time to harvest that crop and get it in. Well, that's pretty much what I'm saying to you right now. Folks, as we're moving into this new building, I know all of you have worked so hard. I know every weekend you're there. I know how hard it is to prepare lessons. I know how hard it is to assist when you know that there are others that are not working. I know that in your heart you're thinking, why in the world aren't some of these other people stepping up and helping? I don't know the answer for why they're not all helping. It could be that, you know, I do know that half of the parents of our children, they've only been to our church a year to 2 years. Some of them really aren't sure themselves of their faith just yet. They're still milk Christians, and they're still sitting under Dean and learning from him. Some of them don't have confidence yet to come and to teach others. They're going to get there. They're just not there yet. And I agree, the more hands we have, the more people involved, yes, it would make the job extremely easy. And I know that there are times you think, oh my goodness, why don't they ask somebody else? I've served for 30 years, I've served 40 years. I know that. But I'm asking you right this minute, mostly between, for the months of October, November, December, and part of January, that for those of you who've already served so much, who know how to do this job, if you will please just step it up just a little bit more. If you will, if you're not already serving every week, and if you're just serving, you know, once a quarter or once a month, for just the next 3 or 4 months, will you consider just working a couple more Sundays or a couple more Saturdays? Or if you're working Sunday, maybe you'll work some on Saturday. We are in some classrooms at dangerous levels, most especially on Saturday. I don't know how many children the Lord's going to send us when this new building opens. I know that He has entrusted us with over 300 children a weekend, and it is such an honor when you think about that, the fact that He could send them anywhere, but He sent them to us. That means that what you're doing, He has approved of. So I want to be able to continue for us to take care of these children and educate them in the way that need to be educated. So I'm asking you, I'm saying, number one, I already appreciate every single thing that you're doing, and I do not take any of that for granted. But I'm asking for the sake of the children and for their education and for their safety, and so that the parents can learn a little bit more about Jesus sitting in the sanctuary, if you will consider calling your room coordinator, emailing your room coordinator, or catching them even in the hallway and saying, you know what, let's work together and find a couple of more areas or a couple of more times or a couple more services that I can serve. I want you to think about the fact they call here in North Carolina, they call tobacco the golden leaf. It's the golden crop. And yet that tobacco, when we get it in the barn, was going to dry, be crumbled up, placed in a sleeve of paper and smoked, burned and gone. And what the Lord has called you to do, you and I both, is to work on a whole nother crop in a whole different field than tobacco. And it is with His precious children. He is giving you the opportunity to be a part of what's going on in His field. So, catch Brenda, catch Diane, catch me or Amy. Speak with Joanna or Holly or Fran. See what more you can do in the next few months just to get us through. I promise you on my end, we're doing some different things to try to recruit new help, and we are trying to shift some positions around to make us stronger and more efficient as we grow. But I'm asking you now to do what you've always done and serve just a little bit more to get us there. Thank you for your time.